So for the next 30 minutes, we plan to be entertained by a wonderful man. I have spent a good deal of time. I am going to buy him a long string so that he can attach it to his wrist, because he has a habit of leaving his thumb drive.
It's not that. It's a weakness.
He says a weakness, I say habit, because twice in my company, he's lost his thumb drive. He left it at my house on one occasion, and the other occasion, he and I were in the Chicago Historical Museum, and he left it in the computer. So I'm going to tie a string around the thumb drive and tie it to his finger. I'm going to do that right after, before the parting testimony. We're going to do the roll of families, okay? So, I'm thrilled to have A. Charles Clark here. A stands for Alma. His father is present with us, and we're grateful for that. Unfortunately, his brother Anton is not. He is ill and is in the McKay Hospital. I'm not sure that he can accept phone calls, but certainly an email or a card sent to the McKay Hospital would pick up his spirits. So we remember Anton as he is away from us. His daughter is videotaping our efforts today so that he can vicariously enjoy our family reunion. Charles is a delight. We have had a ball. From the days when we were planning our Nauvoo trip, we
better stop you before you do part of the truth.
He's bigger than I am, so I have to watch it. We have had a ball working together on a variety of things, and recently we spent time together in northern Illinois. We arrived and rendezvoused at the gravestone of our esteemed ancestor, Timothy Baldwin Clark, of whom Charles will address us. I had the privilege of dedicating the grave, and Charles gave some brief remarks about Timothy Baldwin Clark in May of 2004. Up in front, there is a stone and an explanation of what that stone represents. But I won't go into greater detail. You can read it for yourself. But suffice it to say that when we were placing a stone on what we thought was an unmarked grave, divine providence indicated where that marker should be sited. And in the preparation for pouring of the foundation, they uncovered the original headstone for Timothy Baldwin Clark. And that's the fragment of that headstone that has been given to us by the cemetery, and it currently is in the Farmington Museum, which unfortunately is open only on Wednesdays from 1 to 4.
It's by appointment too.
It's by appointment also, but the public hours are 1 to 4 on Wednesday.
I can give you a phone number for you to get.
Thank you. If lady in the striped shirt will give you a phone number if you want to make your own appointment. But they have delightful things about the Clark family there. So without further ado, I'll run the computer for Charles.
I also left in the thumb drive in the church history library yesterday.
See? The big screen.
I'm concerned about the expectation of entertainment. I'll try to be informative. I don't know how entertaining I will be. I feel deeply honored to be here today. It's not very often I give a talk with my father in the audience, aunts, cousins, nephews, nieces, other people that I know. Dad, would you stand, please? Yeah, you're the one Dad I have.
25 years from now.
That's the promised entertainment. Years ago, I got interested in Timothy Baldwin Clark's story, partially because of my brother's effort to document the life of Ezra Thompson Clark. Just want to prove to you that what David has said is true. There is a copy, a picture of him, in the Chicago Historical Library and Museum archive.
We'll turn quickly.
Go ahead. I have several purposes today, all of which will remain undone. I want to share some information with you, but not enough to complete the story. I want to tease you with the notion that there's much more to this story than we've all known, and suggest to you also the notion that it's really good when you keep accurate records. Much of what I've discovered is undoing myths passed down by early writers of the Clark history. Clark Street in Chicago was not named for our ancestors. It's unlikely, but possible, that the first house built in Chicago was partially assisted by Timothy Baldwin, but we're not sure of it, etc. So, depending on who you read, there are many errors that need to be fixed. I would like to give you a brief glimpse today into Timothy Baldwin's life as pertains to the person who I think is the real pioneer. Now, I know Ezra T. is highly regarded by all of us, and gratefully so, but his life is milquetoast compared to that of his father, in my opinion. And hopefully I can just give you a little bit of a glimpse of that. The first thing I would like to do is speak about this book just for a moment. I had the pleasure in 2007 or 6, I think it was, of going to Guilford, Connecticut, meeting Robert Gould in his advanced years, talking to him. He actually autographed my copy. Here's a man who wrote a book about people he wasn't related to, simply because some of our kin provided him the energy and the vision and the resources to do so. He has an exhaustive library full of research cards that made this book possible. If you don't have this in the library of every one of your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, I think you're doing them a disservice. It's a very excellent starting point. The other thing that it does is captures a lot of the information that was early on recorded in the church genealogical records, which frankly is the only source of a lot of the information that I've been able to find. Next. So, today I want to show you a few documents that make points, do some interpolation, and show you a few other things. Go ahead. This is a photocopy of the entry in the Milford First Church to prove that Timothy Baldwin Clark was born. Now, the only proof that he was born is that he was christened. And since you don't christen dead babies, we know that he was born. Most family records show March 15th. That comes from an entry in the Jacobus book, but there's some doubt about it because it's not well documented. But we know that he was christened May 10th, 1778, just soon after actually during the Revolutionary War. We know that he also moved, probably, go ahead, in 1780 to New Milford, a community that had been set up by his ancestors in 1703. I have on the table up here to the side some original newspapers from New Haven, Connecticut. Now, how many of you know your Connecticut geography? Where is New Haven versus Milford?
North.
It's actually east.
Northeast.
Ah, that's good, northeast slightly. 11 miles. In 1639, our ancestors, Deacon George Clark, was part of a group that came from Boston and settled New Haven. They soon thereafter broke off and settled in Milford under the leadership of Reverend Peter Pruden. And there began kind of the Clark history in America. But I just have, this is an original, this is the real deal. This is from September of 1801. I've got some newspapers over there from 1805 and 1806 you may peruse if you'd like. Just to get a flavor for what life was like in early Connecticut. You've probably already read those already. The grocery store that's also accepting beef bladders and pavement, I thought was kind of interesting. Next. Notice entry number 3 from one of the newspapers. The Patchen family is offering up their home and farm to move to New Connecticut. New Connecticut is known as the Western Reserve, or what we now know as part of the eastern counties of the state of Ohio. Just to summarize some of Timothy's activity, the only other real facts that I know about him in the state of Connecticut have to do with property. He purchased property in Wolcott, which is about 30 miles east of New Milford. His brothers were already over there and had been landowners for a while. What originally took them there, I do not know. But he bought 5 acres and several years later, sold it back to his brother for not the same price he paid for it. So I guess he started slow in commerce. But I have these 6 or 7 documents that prove his activity and presence in Connecticut at those time frames. They also show his place of origin or place of domicile at the time. I'd like to point out the one on the bottom. I have a copy here of the document wherein Polly Keeler Clark's father deeded her some property as a gift. He was so proficient at deeding out property that when he died, there was no will necessary because he'd given everything away. What I want you to know from it is that this and a few other documents are the only place that I find Timothy's wife referred to by name, and it's always Polly. I don't know where this Mary thing started, and I don't know who did or why it was done, but I have found no document that calls her Mary. Now, I found family histories.
Mary and Polly were in use a lot.
Well, not in any documents. I think that's the tradition it crept into our history. Her father called her Polly.
But it's a common thing.
No, I'm saying that might be true, but it's not true in this case. You can call her Mary if you like, but she's Polly, I think. That's what the documents say.
The whole genealogy of that area has Polly and they have Mary with them.
Not any document I found about our
Not
ancestors.
documents, but it's.
I understand. I know, but
Historically, Polly is the diminutive of Mary.
Yeah.
How you take something for 4 letters and make it a diminutive with
with
5,
yeah.
you know, but it is.
I've only found her called Polly. It's okay, we'll call her Polly.
No, Baldwin was known as Baldwin, not Timothy.
Except when he is referred to in documents.
Right.
And he's always Timothy Baldwin. Next. That is all I know about Timothy in Connecticut. There's a lot of family history that says that Sarah was born there, and Myra was born there, and Laura was born there, and they give the dates and the places. But I can't find any of that information in the documents. I don't know who originally put it in the Genealogical Society Library of Facts. I assume they're true, but I just can't find any documentation at all. So, a primary document, there's certainly a lot of secondary. In approximately 1808, I suggest 1808 because in 1807 in the fall, a month after Laura was born, he sold the last property in Brookfield, and that shows up in Trumbull County, Ohio in 1810. I think he moved in the fall or spring of 1808, 1809. For various reasons that you'll be able to read about in hopefully about a year. They took a 600-mile trek that took them at least 2 months to make. Now, she had just had a baby a month or 2 previous to this, so already had 2 young daughters with them. So they had 2 young daughters and a baby, animals, wagon, I don't know what all he owned. He'd sold this property for a modest amount, but moved to Ohio. His brothers already lived in Ohio. He had a sister there living already. But again, I'm documenting and trying to suggest through interpolation and deduction why he may have moved there. Go ahead. In 1809, I should say 1809, on the tax list of 1809 in Trumbull County, Vienna Township, we find these interesting entries. Joseph Clark, his older brother who never married, probably. John Clark, his older brother who married and had multiple children. And there on the bottom you see B. Timothy. Well, I find B. Timothy, I find Timothy B., I find Baldwin, I find Baldwin, and these all kinds of different folks. Soon after they moved to Vienna in Ohio, Rhoda was born. She cites it in her own history, and her younger brother, William O. Clark, cites it in his history as well, that Rhoda was born in Ohio. I read something just today in the church history library that was one of your ancestors saying that the first 6 children were born in Connecticut. It's not true. I don't know where it came from, but that's the sort of thing that we're finding. Anyway, in 1810, Timothy's name appears on the list of those people who were claiming an earmark for their cattle. And I'm going to get a copy of that document. As it turns out, when I served in the Columbus Temple, I met the granddaughter of the woman whose husband had the original book that he donated to the township record system. So I'll be following that up and get an original copy now, or a copy of the original. In 1811, now you can't see this very well, unfortunately. 1811, he shows up on circle down there with his brother John. They appear on an election roster wherein they were voting for sheriff and commissioner. This is the sort of thing I'm finding that documents where and when and who. And it doesn't rely on just myth and supposition and poor memory. But thankfully for us, Timothy was just early enough in his advancing across the country that he seems to get mentioned a little bit. I have no evidence he was ever a prominent person, possibly until he moved to Northern Illinois. But he just gets mentioned enough to find everywhere he moved. And see that David Keeter Clark was born there as well, as was Barrett. 1811, he's still there, paid taxes on 200 acres of property. Timothy Baldwin Clark, John Clark, and Joseph Clark, they all seem to show up in the same spot. You'll notice that Joseph had, what's that?
250.
No, it's 583 acres.
He paid $250.
No, those are acres.
He paid on all of those.
Yeah, he had about 500 acres. That's Joseph. John had about 130, and depending on the document I find, there's different acreage shown, but they were certainly landowners in that part of eastern Ohio, just a few miles from the Pennsylvania border. They border on being land barons, actually, it looks like. Keep going. 1812, he shows up on the census. I wish you, can you magnify that a little bit, David, somehow, or just, is it in focus as much as possible? On the left-hand side is a document I found in January in the National Archives of Washington, D.C. In one of these documents that Alicia scanned, I've also been through that file. It's very thick. She made me feel a lot better when she said she tossed out all the duplicates. That's good. I reduced the file size by about half. There's a note in there that my father's Uncle Heber visited the National Archives in 1923 and found this record. Well, when I went to the National Archives in January and found this record, on the back is penciled the date of the very date he claimed to have been there. Somebody wrote on the back of the document that it was used on that date in 1923, written in pencil. Yeah, your uncle had one, But here are the names that show up in the 1812 census for Vienna Township, Trumbull County. John Clark, you know, he's the oldest brother of Timothy. Joseph Clark is older. Reuben Clark is, I don't know who he is. He's in a different township. Timothy B. Walter shows up. I don't know who he is. Ira Bartholomew is a brother-in-law to Timothy Baldwin Clark. This document on the left I referred to, it documents his service in the War of 1812, Judy. He was in uniform, I guess, for about 60 days. I don't know what he did. I can't find any record in all of the Ohio State Historical Library, where I used to go every week almost for 3 years. I don't know what his unit did in the War of 1812. Nevertheless, he got a slight
He got paid $16.90 for his service.
Which is small compensation to leave behind a family of 6 children for your wife. Okay. Ohio is going to be a rich chapter in the life of Timothy Baldwin and Baldy. It's where he first becomes a Methodist, as far as I can tell. He's known in several histories as a class leader in Methodism. Some of the names that he later is more closely tied to, I think he first encountered in eastern Ohio as through the Methodist Church relationship. In 1816, now for those of you that are history buffs, and you happen to know the story of the Prophet's family moving from Vermont well, you'll recall that in New England, the summer of 1816 was known as the year of no summer, because there was frost in every state in every month of the year. The crops failed miserably. In 1816, we had an account wherein, even in eastern Ohio, it was cited that there was frost in every month of the year, and the crops failed so much the country stank. That's the year that Timothy decided to move from Ohio. Why he did, for sure, I don't know. But on November 16th, he sold both pieces of property he had. One piece, the 100 acres, he sold to his deaf brother, Andrew, who later became a neighbor of Sanford Porter when Sanford moved into Vienna. They were next door neighbors, for those of you that know the Porter family part. Interestingly, 10 years after Lewis and Clark ascended the Missouri River and explored the Pacific Northwest, we have another Lewis and Clark on a river. This time it's Timothy Baldwin Clark with 6 children and his War of 1812 buddy, Oliver Lewis, floating down on a flatboat 555 miles from Vienna Township, Ohio, down past Pittsburgh, past Wheeling, West Virginia, all the way to Madison, Indiana. Why they got off there, I have no clue. They stopped in Cincinnati for the Sabbath day. In fact, as they marched their families to the boat, they sang hymns. Now, at some point in its history, Edward Barrett Clark talks about Ezra having come from a religious and devout family. Would you march your family to the boat singing hymns? Is it Sing We Now at Party or something else? They stopped in Cincinnati for the Sabbath day and later went to Madison and stayed there approximately 2 years. It is there that he met Joseph Oglesby, the prominent Methodist minister, after whom he named his son, William O. There's again much here, but there's no document of land ownership because Jefferson County, Indiana, of course, had one of those famous courthouse fires in 1852 or something that took all the records. Because later on, he's always acquiring property. I assume he owned property there too, but I don't know that for sure. There, their oldest daughter was married. You can see on the right what happened. William O was born. Polly's mother, Sarah, died, still living in Brookfield, Connecticut. Sarah Clark, their oldest, was married to the local tanner, William Cole. And Eunice, his sister, married Asa Bellamy, still back in Vienna. So just try to keep track of the family. Let's go back. There is a very interesting account, and for those, again, that are history buffs, I urge you to always go to the place. Don't just rely on the internet and Family History Center in Salt Lake. There's a document I found in Madison, Indiana, in a local library. It's a local source. In the memories of a early member of the Methodist Church in Madison, Indiana, about 1818, he recounts the faithful brethren that were in the congregation, the Jacksons, the Coburns, and one eccentric New Englander named Clark. Small town, settled mostly by Southerners, so I know who it was. It was in Madison, Indiana, where his Methodist roots, I think, solidified. There he met Shadrach Ruart, to whom he later sold property in Illinois, had the Joseph Oglesby connection, who had previously been a minister in Illinois. I think that's one of the means by which he acquired interest in Illinois, etc. There's a lot more there, too. So we go to Illinois, and there's a ton of things to talk about in Illinois that we certainly don't have enough days for. But again, in 1818, and I have a photocopy here. I just obtained this the other day from Western Illinois University. Here's a photocopy of the deed wherein Timothy Baldwin Clark became the first white owner of a piece of property in southern Illinois in 1818. If you know anything about land records, you'll know that in those days, the original holder of the land was given a patent by the President of the United States. So he has a patent from the President for that property. I've been on that property. It's fairly close to the Kneep property. Anybody recognize the Kneep name besides Judy? The Kneeps were Morris Phelps' grandparents in southern Illinois. As a young man, he came out from eastern Ohio to visit them in Illinois and met young Laura. And the rest is history. He also bought other property, which he later sold in 1826 or 5, let's say 5. The next 3 or 4 years of his life, I can document it, but I can't place it in the right sequence because it doesn't work if I try to account for all the things that people left in their own history. So I'm not sure when he left or what happened, but again, there's more to say. 4 more children were born, all sons, or 3 sons, I'll say. His brother Joseph died in that time, and he went back to Ohio several times. His name appears on legal documents in Vienna County, in Vienna Township, Trumbull County, during the time he was living in Illinois. So I know that at least twice he went back there. I personally think that in 1824 and 26 is when he met Sanford Porter, heard from him his marvelous manifestations of 1815, wherein Sanford was told that there would be a church restored or something like that, having the full truth in it. I think that in visiting his brother Andrew on his old property, he heard those stories from Andrew's neighbor, Sanford Porter, and thus had the beginning of that interest. And then Sanford Porter eventually moved to part of Illinois where Timothy was living. So there's a lot to unravel there. Go ahead, David. Again, 1824, there's the quitclaim deed back in Ohio for his brother. Myra is married, 1825, Mary Ann is born. I mean, they had 12 children. He had 2 or 3 daughters married before they quit having children of their own. Laura's married to Morris C. Phelps. Nathan Clark moves finally from Connecticut, his younger brother, who married a Keeler also. Nathan finally moves to Ohio, and Timothy is there in the presence of in 1826. Rhoda is married to John Cooper, and David Keeler in that year gifts his property to my daughter Polly, wife of Timothy B. Clark of the town of Palmyra, Lawrence County, Illinois. Palmyra no longer exists. It's a swampy place just north of Mount Carmel, Illinois, if you know where that is. Okay. In 1829, look at the family structure. Sarah, Myra, Laura, and Rhoda were married by then, in 1825, 1829, and then he pretty much had sons after that. By then, I think he's a very devout Methodist. He's following the renowned Reverend Jesse Walker. If you read any Methodist history from that period, you'll run into him. He was very prominent in the history of Illinois, starting in southern Illinois and central Illinois to northern Illinois. From this point forward, I think Timothy was following his religious leader, Reverend Jesse Clark. In 1829, Timothy probably sold squatters' rights to John Green, who was one of the early pioneers of Ottawa, Illinois, and then moved to Plainfield. Now, I'm going to quit right there. Almost. There's much, much more to say. The story of Timothy Baldwin Clark blossoms in northern Illinois. He's one of the original settlers. I've recently come in contact with a lady in Plainfield, Illinois, who has, for the last 45 years, dedicated her life to compiling the history of that place. She is elated with our interest as well. You read those emails?
Yeah.
Did you? Yeah. It's possible, and I will kind of announce it to you right now, it's possible that she may have found the Baldwin Clark original home. So we'll find out in the next few weeks. He was very early on a pioneer there. He was very involved with things involving Chicago, involving Plainfield, involving the setting up of a stagecoach line from Chicago to Ottawa. The Illinois River was navigable as far north as Ottawa in those days. So the commerce continued from Ottawa to Chicago via stage and freighter. He was involved in that for some reason. I don't know why an obscure man from Plainfield was chosen, but he was, along with Elijah Wentworth in Chicago to survey a road from Chicago to Ottawa. So there are lots, and this is just touching it. He also was participant in the Black Hawk War of 1832 with 3 of his sons. Now, if you do the math, in 1832, how old was he? 54. And 3 of his sons participated in the Black Hawk War. Now, I don't know if they did much. It was kind of a skirmish engaged in by few, but nevertheless. He was a patriot. He was a father. He was a business-oriented guy, apparently, and a very responsible Methodist. I want to share with you some delightful stuff I found recently. It's going to take a minute, but let's go. Charles C. Rich, who later married one of the Morris Phelps and Laura Clark daughters as a plural wife.
Yeah, Mary Ann.
Yeah. Left. My mother gave me this book years ago. as a gift out of Dad's library, because she was getting rid of the library because someday they won't need it. This random book shows up and it's got all this stuff about Timothy Baldwin Clark in it. It's great. Okay, when Morris Phelps and Charles Rich came back to Illinois on their mission, they had these experiences. This is some copies of the original journal of Charles C. Rich that can be found in the Church History Library. I'm wearing a button today they gave me yesterday to say, by the way, that the Church History Library archives are now searchable online. So that's news. Commencing April 29, 1835. Well, it goes back. Okay, click. There's his entry for this, and I'll let you read it. You can read it faster than I can say it. This is Charles C. Rich, who later became an apostle, was a general in the Nauvoo Legion, leader of saints across the plains, etc. If you know his story, he's one of those prominent, kind of second-level early pioneers, after you say Brigham Young's name.
Translate Father Clark.
Father Clark is Timothy Baldwin. Ruth Napier and her husband John later was baptized. Probably the original settlers of Naperville, Illinois, a very prosperous and wonderful place to live near Chicago. But here we are in May. Oh, go back, I didn't highlight the obvious point. Baldwin Clark was baptized on May 7th, 1835. It wasn't about 1835. It wasn't about May 1835. We know when he was baptized. It was documented firsthand by the person who saw it done. So, that sort of thing. Anyway, keep going here. For several weeks, they stayed in the area. Now, in 1836, we've got Timothy, he's 57 years old, Paul is 49, and the daughters are all gone. By this time in 1835, Myra and her husband, John Sargent, have died in Louisiana. That's all I know. Don't know how, why they were there, what they're doing. It's obvious that he was very involved in the church as soon as he was baptized. I assume he was converted earlier. I don't know why he wasn't in 1831. I suspect because of the strong relationship he had with Reverend Jesse Walker. But they're all the time at the Clarks. They don't like the Clarks. Planted some plowed potatoes for him. Brother Morris is Morris Phelps. Judy, you need to look at this journal. It's wonderful. Okay, now here's the point. Here's one more point. Charles Rich was a letter writer. I don't know how to account for this. But on Saturday, September 5th, he's writing a letter to his friend William O. Clark, Timothy's son. The next day, he's preaching at his father's home near Peoria, and Father Clark is there with his family. They are on the way to Missouri. They are moving. This is the documentation that they are moving. September 8th, Brother Clark and family come home with me. They're on the move. Next. Left home in company with Father Clark. We traveled as far as the Egland settlement, 20 miles away. The next day we went 14 miles. Canton is a city 20 or 30 miles west of Peoria on the way to Illinois, or to Missouri. They moved to Missouri. Not in 1831 and not in 1835. No one in their right mind in 1835 moved from Illinois to Jackson County, as is claimed in many of our histories. He did go to Jackson County. This precious little document is really interesting. In the early days of the church, the traveling elders often had the local saints attest to their worthiness and the fact that they were on duty. As traveling elders. This note, and I will attribute this interpretation to my colleague up there on the stand, David Clark. It looks to me, after hearing him talk about it, that the signature of Timothy Clark matches the penmanship of the document.
You look at the T and the B and the C in the bodies of up here, it appears to me that the author of this document is Timothy B. Clark.
That is the only direct evidence we have of Timothy Clark. No family Bible, no journal, no diary, no War of 1812 belt buckle, no sword from the Black Hawk War, no buttercup from some churn, nothing except his signature on that document. That is his signature.
signed by Morris Phelps,
his son-in-law,
and Pierce Hawley, his son William O. Clark, and Peter Wycliffe, who was a member of the branch there in northern Illinois.
June 18th, 1835. Okay. Yesterday, I had the privilege of finding a letter from William O. Clark to his relatives in March of 1839. I've annotated that letter because I want to transcribe it and get it accurate, but you can go there and look at it yourself. The microfilm copy is scratched. For some reason, I felt prompted to ask if I could look at the original document, hoping they had it, and they did. So I got a copy of the original document, which is not scratched, wherein William O. announces the death of his mother, Polly. He doesn't call her by name. Hopefully you've had a chance to read those. Our mother has, these are all his words. Our mother has bid all farewell and took her flight to her peaceful home. He's very laudatory of her devotion and of her commitment to the gospel to the very end. Those were her words that said, my work is done on the earth as well. There's much more in the letter, but that's the highlights of it, I think. There is a ton more to talk about Timothy Baldwin. His life in Missouri was interesting. He was later, when they moved to Montrose, he was a neighbor, and I think one of the things that continued the relationship that Ezra Thompson Clark had with President Woodruff. Not only was he there in April of 1839 when the temple lot was dedicated in Far West, and a new apostle named Wilford Woodruff was ordained, sitting on the southeast cornerstone at 1 o'clock in the morning. I think that's where the Clark-Woodruff relationship began. It's because Timothy, for some reason, was still in Far West after everyone else had left. Because he was there, all the brethren came to the house at night and had breakfast, and then proceeded to the temple site and dedicated it, excommunicated 22 members, and then left after singing a hymn. When Timothy moved to Montrose, Iowa, instead of Nauvoo, he lived near Laura Clark Phelps, his daughter, and others. In the 1840 census of Iowa, the entry right above Timothy Baldwin Clark on here is Wilford Woodruff. I have copies, digital copies, of the letters that Phoebe Woodruff wrote to her husband in England on his mission, talking about Timothy B. Clark helping take care of her. That, I think, is the genesis of that relationship. Perhaps it's that reason that led President Wilford Woodruff to ask his old friend from Farmington to come and speak in a special pre-Salt Lake Temple dedication service and bear his testimony in 1893 to leaders of the church that were there and assembled before the public dedication. I don't know where to stop because there's no logical place to end, but I will stop unless you have a question.
Charles, you didn't state explicitly he moved to Far West when he moved to Missouri.
He moved to Mirabelle Township.
Maryville.
Mirabelle. M-I-R-A-B-I-L-E.
And what year was that?
Well, he moved in 1835.
35.
Yes. I haven't gone back. I'm in the middle of writing the book right now, so I haven't. Missouri's kind of way back in my head.
So,
But he owned a lot of property there.
okay.
In fact, I want to mention that I just found the other day that when he, talk about tender mercies here, David, when he left Missouri with his young children, the girls were married, the boys were still with him, except the older two who never did move to Missouri. He went to Quincy. Well, I just found out in January at the BYU Library that he went to the circuit court and left a, what do you call it, deposition? He left a deposition stating the value of his loss in Missouri. He also did the same thing in September of 1840 in Lee County, Iowa. To my point, he owned lots of property, so did Morris Phelps, and so did John Cooper in about the same place, in Mirabelle Township, which is about a mile or two from the Far West Temple site. And then Polly died in February of 1839. And Wanda. I'm going to have a whole paragraph or a page or 20 pages about that.
We've had long discussions between us.
In bottom line, I think he was tired. Now, Judy didn't tell you this story because it's not part of her story. In February of 1842, when Laura died, in what I think is now Warsaw, Illinois, isn't it? It's what, 10 miles north of Carthage? 8 miles?
Yeah.
It's out there in the country. Have you been there, Judy? Yeah. Sarah died. Sarah Clark Cole died in Indiana in the same month, Ralph, wasn't it?
1 week apart.
1 week apart. And by then, Sarah was the mother of 8 or 10 children.
15.
Well, was she?
She was the mother of 15.
That's quite an accomplishment. She was married in 1818.
For 7 of them to maturity.
Yeah, and Ralph knows that story very well. So, Myra dies in Louisiana. I don't know how or when they ever found that out. Sarah and Laura die in the same month. I don't know when they found out about Sarah. I mean, he's had tragedy in his life.
Sarah's story is in the library of Salt Lake and it's on film. Her granddaughter's Laura's history. But when Laura, one thing that Carol did not mention, Laura and Phelps went on a mission. Do you remember that time back to Kirtland to get away?
Yeah, she and Morris went together without the
Came
children.
back through Ripley County, Indiana, which is where Sarah was living. And their last child, Spencer, was born there. Laura gave birth to another little girl about 2 months after that and named the daughter Laura. And then died within 2 years.
Yeah. It's very difficult to understand the circumstances. When they settled in Montrose in Lee County, it was in the half-breed tract. And unfortunately, they purchased land. Joseph did in behalf of the church and then sold it to others. There was no clear title. He purchased.
He bought it from somebody who didn't own it.
Yeah, he bought it from, and there was literally land grant to the Indians, and somebody sold it as property with a clear title, and it wasn't. So Charles and I have had long discussions on that. We eagerly anticipate Charles's book coming out on these things.
And in our book. Someone today has already given me a fact I didn't have. Where are you?
Thank you, Charles. I hope you can appreciate his dedication and zeal. I certainly do. I'm his chauffeur. He said, well, tell me about this. And so I take it. And he says, well, you know about this? And he tells me. And I've lived in Illinois for 33 years, you know. So he's really become an expert, and we value his work and appreciate his comments today. Let us now do two things. We're going to have a roll call of the families, and we want to make sure that everybody is signed in. And then when the chairs are put away, Alan has a trunk full of ice cream that we're going to assemble in the lawn between here and their pavilion. I don't know if that pavilion is reserved. We didn't, so we're going to meet just outside for the ice cream social. And we'll call for the children to come up and join us at that time. We appreciate those who have gone downstairs to assist with the children's reunion. They were doing some wonderful things. They've been focusing on Annie Clark Tanner. Annie baked all the bread for the families. There's a wonderful coloring book that was created by Annie's descendants. Who gave you that? She must be downstairs. They're having a coloring book to take home. They're making butter. They are buttering homemade bread downstairs. They were going to have the opportunity to, with a couple of antique rug beaters, to beat some rugs, to talk about the things that were done in our pioneering ancestry. So we hope that their experience was a good one. If you did not bring your children or your grandchildren of youthful exuberance in 2 years, bring them. Because this is the first of an anticipated carry-on of a dual reunion for adults and for children. Because we want to raise these children up knowing Ezra T. Clark. All right, when I call the family's name, and I apologize because I did some from memory and then I opened the green book to make sure I didn't forget anybody. I'll call the family. If you descend from that child of Ezra T., would you please stand? Those who descend from Timothy Baldwin, please stand. Charles is coming. Are you standing up?
I am part of the family.
Okay, there you go. So I think there's 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 14.
And then we've got a kid downstairs. I don't know if
Yeah, thank you. I think they're doing the registration downstairs, I hope.
Okay, now I also have Zane Elkins with me, and he has a grandma here, and I don't know which son he's through, so you know who you are. It's Wanda something. Okay, he's downstairs. So he's with you, so he counts for you.
Wilford Woodruff, please. We have one of our Russell's daughters. Congratulations. Thank you very much. Sarah. The Knowltons, thank you. Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith Clark? Going once? Have to work on that. Charles Rich Clark. 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, 14, 16, 17. I count 17. 17. All right. Mary Elizabeth Robinson. We've got one. Hiram Don Carlos. Now Elma. Q Elma. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 29.
There's my daughter from Phoenix. Who just
Oh.
arrived.
All right. I got, what did I say last? 29. Edward B. Clark, please stand. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. Thank you. Annie. Annie Clark Tanner. All right. Susan. 2 from 2. Nathan. Nobody from Nathan? Well, we'll have to work on that. How about Laura? Uh-oh, 2 in a row. How about Horace? Wonderful. 2. You know the one name I didn't put my own? Amasa. Those are from Amasa. 2, 4, 6, 7, and there are 2 downstairs, 9. Did I miss anybody? I think I got everybody. I hope I got everybody. We thank you all for your attendance. We've asked Lynetta Maxfield, as was requested of Ezra, that his testimony be read at every assemblage of his family in reunion. And following Lynetta Maxfield's reading of his testimony and parting instructions, our benediction and blessing on the food will be offered by Ron Smith.
Testimony and parting instructions, July 24th, 1901. To my wives and children, feeling that I shall not enjoy the privilege of addressing you in a united capacity many more times during my earthly sojourn, I am impelled by a husband's and a father's love to offer you my final and parting instructions. I bear you this my testimony. Before I left Nauvoo, I heard the prophet Joseph say he would give the saints a key whereby they would never be led away or deceived, and that was, the Lord would never suffer the majority of his people to be led away or deceived by impostors, nor would he allow the records of this church to fall into the hands of the enemy. I heard Joseph say this, and I also heard him say that he would roll the burden of the apostleship upon the quorum of the 12. I heard Joseph preach many times, heard him in the last sermon he ever delivered, bear testimony to the truth of the work that God had called him to do. Also, that the Lord had never suffered him to be slain by his enemies, because his work had not been done until a short time ago. He had laid the foundation of this work and rolled the burden of the priesthood upon the 12, and having given them their washings and anointings, they would now bear off this work triumphantly, and it would roll on faster than ever before. And if the Lord was willing to accept of him, he was willing to go. This he spoke to the people. I was one who heard his voice, and know that he spoke like an angel from heaven. I never heard him speak with more power than then, and I heard him many times. I was satisfied. I knew him to be a prophet of God. I had heard him prophesy many times, and had seen his prophecies fulfilled, and had also shaken hands with him, and he had blessed me. And I had felt the influence and power of the Lord upon him and upon me, and I have never forgotten that blessing from that day to this, and I never shall. 2 days later, the prophet was martyred. And 2 or 3 weeks later, when the saints held a conference and Brigham Young arose as leader of the church, I want to bear record that he spoke as Joseph used to speak. To all appearances, the same voice, the same gestures, the same stature. I bear this record to all the world, to my children and to my children's children. And I also bear record that this work is God's work, and that it will roll on as it has done from that day to this. I have never turned my face away, and have always had delight in keeping the counsel of his servants in every particular. I have had many privations and many trying scenes traveling on the plains and on the desert, and I know that those men who have stood at the head of his church are men of God, and also the men who now stand at the head, and they will bear off this work triumphantly. And I say to my children and to my grandchildren, if they will do right and keep the commandments of God, no good thing shall be withheld from them, and they shall have a testimony that God set up this work, and it will roll forth, and those who help it will stand, and those who fight against it will fall and crumble with the wicked. I bear this testimony, and leave it for the benefit of my children and my children's children. For I realize I have but a short time to live on earth. I have passed my 77th year, and it has been a pleasure to me to be associated during that time with the prophet and apostles, and those whom I know were men holding the holy Melchizedek priesthood. I bear this testimony and wish it written, that my children and my children's children may know that I have finished my work, and bear this testimony before them and all the world, in the name of the Lord Jesus, even so, amen. I am impressed in this, the evening of life, to admonish my family of the importance of devoting some measure of their time to temple work, and it is my wish that a genealogical record be prepared, to include as many of my ancestors as it is possible to get information about. And when this record shall have been compiled, it is my most earnest wish that I may have, as often as possible, a representative in one of the temples of my Heavenly Father to perform work for the dead. If I could behold the spirit of union and mutual love and support in the conduct of my family as I now look upon their future lives, I should feel that great satisfaction and pleasure that I have always enjoyed in the happiness that comes from family union. I desire to urge the mothers to teach their children to attend their primaries, Sunday schools, and meetings, and to observe the law of obedience and of baptism at the age of 8 years, that they may also teach the word of wisdom, to pay their tithes and offerings, and to honor the priesthood. And I promise the mothers that if they will do this, in the sincerity of their hearts, they will bring forth noble sons and daughters to bear off this work, and it will be a great honor to them and the family at large. and they will live long upon the earth to inherit it, and no power of evil shall prevail against them. And I seal these blessings upon them by the power of the holy Melchizedek priesthood. I admonish those who are strong to be thoughtful of and helpful to those who are weaker. And I trust that it will never occur to any member of my family that any one of them shall ever be justified in taking any undue advantage of another. I warn my family against any spirit of dissension and commend to them the spirit of fairness, justice, and impartiality towards one another. I plead for the weak, because the strong will take care of themselves, and those who cherish the memory of their father and honor the name he has given them in life will feel the responsibility that they are under, and all the members of this organization should protect one another's good name and avoid any unseemly gossip. Be charitable, helpful, patient, kind, and loving towards one another. And God will sustain you and your families as you have sustained me and mine. Well, it has been my privilege, because of the natural endowments with which God has clothed me, to accumulate something of this world's goods. I would not have my family suppose that I esteem money as I esteem honor, virtue, and above all things, fidelity to the Church of Christ. And I trust that no one of my family will ever seek and appreciate the treasures of this world above the treasures that come from an honorable and God-fearing life devoted to religious duties and the obligations which men owe to one another and to their God. I have accumulated since my earliest settlement in Farmington as much property as I reasonably could along the street on which a number of my family are now dwelling. And I desire, so far as my family can, consistent with their best interests, that they maintain their real estate, that they may be helpful to one another, and that the homes of my family here may always be a gathering place for those who may be scattered in different parts of this and adjoining states. And I especially commend the spirit of hospitality to my children. These parting instructions have been the burden of my thought during the closing days of my career among you. And it is my wish that at every family gathering, these my parting words be read before the assemblage of this family organization.